Hey, how's it going? Today we're going to answer the question of, does gear really matter?
It's too late now to turn around and back again. I made my bed and now I lay my head in it. And I'm sorry I'm not perfect, but I knew that I wouldn't be. I guess it's for the best, you know the worst in me. I'm no good at being good, but I never said I was. And I feel misunderstood, cause I'm trying hard to love. I'm sorry, my actions, they haunt me, and I'll never live it down. I'm no good at being good, but I never said I was. You call my bluff, I won't pick up.
Does gear matter? The quick answer to that is not really. But there are some cases where it actually does. But for the overwhelming majority of people, especially those just starting out, I wouldn't focus too much on gear. I know on YouTube especially, a lot of us who are pursuing photography in the early stages, we watch a lot of these videos to kind of learn the ins and outs and the basics and fundamentals of photography. And while doing so, we're given a lot of content surrounding purchasing the latest and greatest tech and the latest and greatest gear that's out there, which is fine if you're able to afford that and if you actually know what you're doing. But in the beginning, it's really not that important. What you should be learning instead is how to articulate the story that you want to tell through your work in particular. And with what you have on hand and what you can attain at the time is completely enough. It is enough. Now, are there traditional ways to shoot particular types of photography? Yes. If you want to shoot landscape, people suggest that you have a wide angle lens so you can get a lot of that landscape in there. If you want to shoot portraits, typically people talk about tighter lenses like the 50 millimeter or the 85 millimeter. But I mean, again, those are just general rule of thumbs that have been proven to work in the past, but it isn't necessarily the only way to shoot those types of photography. Taking those tips with a grain of salt will help you to begin to learn your particular discipline and to even experiment with different disciplines. But all in all, what you want to consider is how can you contribute to that field of photography? How can you expand that area of photography beyond the general guidelines that have been presented to everyone? You definitely could learn more of the ins and outs of that particular genre, but where you really begin to grow and where you really begin to create your own style and create your own footprint in photography is really by experimenting, trying things differently than everyone else. Otherwise, your work will look like everyone else's and it won't really stand out. But if you're not trying to stand out, that's fine too. There are definitely, again, ways for you to create the same work that other people are creating and kind of give that same aesthetic. And for maybe a lot of commercial work or any kind of corporate work, people are looking for that traditional look. If you're doing corporate headshots, for example, it may not be a good idea to try to add a super stylized look to those corporate headshots, because this is a business and there are certain expectations that a CEO or an employee will want in the professional world for a headshot. They're gonna want the general, sitting on the stool, nice backdrop, and the 1 light, 2 light, 3-point lighting setup for that. So if you want to know it for that reason, that's fine. But even then, do you need the top end gear to make that stuff happen? Of course not. As far as the question of pro gear and does gear make you pro, or does gear determine the threshold for when you started to create professional grade work, I say no. I do not agree with that, and I do not preach that. And I know, again, for a lot of YouTubers, that language is kind of thrown around because it helps them sell their affiliate products, and I get it. It's what they need to do in order to make their income. But to be real with you, the difference between a pro and a beginner is time and skill and knowledge. The more knowledge and skill you gain over time, that's going to determine the level of work you're going to be able to produce with any gear. This is probably, I think, my third video now where I've stressed this, and I'm a huge believer in using what you have to get the results that you need and want. And as you grow and your business grows, if this is something you want to turn into a business, on this topic of being pro, then allow your business to create the income for you to start purchasing that higher price tag gear. But all in all, having a nifty 50 1.8 for around $150 versus the RF 50 millimeter 1.2 for over $2,000. I mean, the difference is you're getting a few stops of light, okay, and you're now having a lens that's weather sealed, and the build quality is apparently better. But to be frank with you, I've had my nifty 50 for over 3 or 4 years now, and it still works perfectly fine. The build quality is perfect for me. I've been able to use it for all these years and still haven't run into any issues with it as far as malfunctioning or breaking or just being complete crap. It's just not the case. I guess you would have to decide if spending an extra $2,000 to consider your setup pro is up to you. If you want a weather sealed lens, or you care about having that red ring, that's completely up to you. Or being able to open up to 1.2 and blurring out the background in every photo. If that's the story that you want to tell, if that's what helps you create the work you want to create, then that's completely fine. Like, there's just other ways you can accomplish that thing, and still be inclusive of the environment without completely. There's other ways to isolate your subject. And those are the kind of things you'll learn, and you kind of have to learn when you're using gear that can't just automatically do that for you. There is a place for that type of stuff. There is a place for having a lens that's weather sealed, especially if you're in a city or area where, again, it rains a lot, or just precipitation in general is going to be an issue for you. But if that's not the case for you, I honestly wouldn't see necessarily the benefit in doing so. You can see so many examples of photographers showing you the difference between their higher end gear and their cheaper gear, and never fails. They usually say, oh, it's a slightly sharper. And then that goes without saying, that's implying, again, that sharper somehow makes a lens better. Is that the case? Is that true? I mean, maybe we can have that discussion in the comments. You let me know. But I'm not necessarily a believer in that. I use a 35 millimeter film camera, and I guarantee you it's not as sharp as my T3i, let alone my EOS R. So, but it still allowed me to capture what I need to capture and what I care about capturing, and telling a story that I truly want to tell. It's the content. The content over gear is what matters. The only time gear begins to matter is when you are being held back by not having it. Or again, in other words, it allows you to do something you were not capable of doing with what you already have. And then, yes, then it's time to bring in more gear. Like, for instance, in this setup, I could have done this with natural light, but if I want the ability to use the natural light for the background here, but to also still light my face so I can expose for that and not be dark in here, then I'm gonna need to bring in lights, which this light is sitting right here. If I want better audio and I don't want to rely on the audio in my camera, then I can get this little cheapo lapel mic that I'm using that's connected to me right now. So there are instances to where gear definitely does improve the quality or the functionality of what you're trying to do. But I wouldn't say that you have to go out and get the most expensive stuff. None of the gear I have here is considered high end. I mean, the light is newer. This is also a ring light, and I think this is called Pop Voice lapel. It's all stuff that for relatively low prices I was able to get to massively improve my capabilities. So consider that as well too. Don't shy away from having cheaper gear, especially in the beginning, because it just helps you to create. At the end of the day, it's all you want to do is have the capability to create what it is that you want to create. Do not fall into the trap like I did in the past of buying things that you think you need in order to get particular results. What I needed to light my video was more light. Not necessarily the aperture 120D, but simply a video continuous light to help me light this side of the scene. I did not need to go out and spend a ridiculous amount of money to upgrade my gear. It was just what I needed, entry level, to allow me to now have the capability of doing it. So what I want you to ultimately take away from this is that practice makes perfect, and limitations force you to be creative, and creativity helps you stand out. Another thing I want you to remember is that knowledge and skill, for the most part, do make up for the gap that gear could fill in. Ultimately, you want to use the tools that you already have and those that are immediately accessible to you to just get started, to start learning, to start that process of figuring out how different components of photography and videography work before you put too much weight into upgrading that gear. And again, having high-end gear isn't what makes you pro. Your knowledge, your ability, your skill is what makes you a professional, and your ability to attract paying customers. If people are willing to pay you for your services and for your work, regardless of the gear you're using, and I promise you they do not know or care about what camera you're shooting with, what lens you're using, or how much your light setup costs. As long as your portfolio fits what they're looking for, as long as your work speaks for itself and it's something that they're attracted to, then you're fine. And as you build up your clientele, as you continue to get work and get booked and bring in an income, then you'll be able to purchase that more high-end gear if you so choose to, if you feel like you need it or you just want it because, I mean, you can afford it, it's your money, and that's completely up to you. But the idea that you need any of those things to get started or to be considered pro or to start making money from photography is just completely untrue. So all in all, again, use the tools that you have and don't ever mistake gear as the substance. If my perspective was helpful for you, I would encourage you to go ahead and like this video and subscribe, and go ahead and leave a comment down below and we can talk more about it if you have any particular questions about my work, my journey in particular, and maybe even what gear I use or begin with. But I would like to wish you all well and just get out there and create. Thank you.